That's good. I guess is the text going to be backwards for everyone on the live stream? I guess I'll worry more about who's on the
Yeah.
room.
That's been a problem for anything we've watched, so I think that's not.
Should be okay.
Oh, great.
Okay. So hi everyone live stream. Today at SICSS Chicago, we're really excited to have a bunch of folks here from the Invisible Institute, which is a 501c journalism production company based in the South Side. They do a lot of different work and have a lot of different strategies, including data curation, investigative reporting, civil rights legislation. And their main goal with all these different strategies is to enable and empower citizens and to be able to hold public institutions accountable for respecting human rights. And so today here we have quite a few guests from the Invisible Institute, and in particular we have Maira Khwaja, who leads the engagement efforts at the Invisible Institute, and in particular does a lot of work working with young people to discuss their experiences with policing here in Chicago. So yeah, I'll hand it off to you.
Cool, thank you so much. Hi everyone. I would love to hear about who you guys are. Just to add on while we were discussing it, the Invisible Institute primarily describes itself as a journalism organization, but we do a lot. We work with a lot of data analysts and data journalists and academics. We also work with the Civil Rights Bar in Chicago, a lot of litigation around the First and Fourth Amendments, and we work with young people on the South Side of Chicago, and also a lot of mothers on the South Side, investigations about homicides and also police involvement in those. So yeah, happy to answer any questions later about what we do generally. I am excited to speak here today because a big part of what I do is working with academics and understanding where their work connects and disconnects with the relationships we have with people who are most affected by policing. And that's primarily what I'm here to discuss with you guys today. How does your work help and hurt communities who are most affected by policing? I would love to go around the room though and understand, like, is anyone here working in with police-related data? If not, what kind of data are you exploring? What are you studying? I think the stuff we'll talk about today applies to many different issues, not just policing, but that's specifically what I focus on. Yeah, so who would like to start? I'd love to know names and what you're studying, and the data you're working with.
I'm Rebecca. I study mass atrocities and political violence. So mine is sort of tangentially related to yours in that I look at state violence against citizens. Yeah.
I'm Christina. I study language and cognitive development for preschoolers.
Nice, very cool.
I'm Richard. I'm in the political science department at Northwestern, and I focus on partisanship and polarization in American politics.
I'm Jay from Illinois. I have some work related to the mentioning events and issue. So I'm using FBI's mentioning database to build like a data set and correlate that with newspaper coverage and media conversation.
Interesting.
My name is Nikki. I study sociology at University of Chicago. I study primarily immigrant integration, so very much related to immigrant integration / policing of immigrants, right, and exclusion of certain populations from society.
I'm interested in trust online, social media, and also I think you might be interested in, this isn't relevant to me, but just like machine learning algorithms and predictive policing, because I know that the city of Chicago is expanding that. Also, if we're thinking about like other issues related to, actually, no, that's.
I'm Jim Pedraza. I'm in the Department of Sociology at Northwestern University, and my research interests are in computational geospatial sociology / criminology and interest in spatial variation crime thus far. That's
I'm Leah, MPP candidate at U Chicago, and my interests lie in the ways in which technology can be used to either perpetuate or dismantle systematic most recently was looking at DNA collection by both local and federal governments and how that translates into perhaps perpetuation of prison industrial complex.
My name is Peter Floyd from State.
I'm a professor in public policy school at Cambridge, and I study political violence, but specifically like careful adaptation.
I'm Daniel Trielli. I'm a PhD student at the Media Technology Society program at Northwestern University. I study the way algorithms impact the way that we receive news information. But I also worked as a journalist back home in Brazil for a long time. Data and computational.
Hi, my name is Tom. I'm doing a social media PhD at the University of Chicago. My interest lies in culinary science.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm at Northwestern. I worked in journalism before grad school, and I researched how journalism was made online. I'm particularly interested right now in digital journalism.
Navi, I'm a PhD student in statistics at Northwestern. I'm interested in record linkage, so Abby Smith is in one list and A.B. Smith is in another.
Yeah, we work at like the police database, or we carry a police misconduct database, and maybe just a huge issue.
Yeah. Yeah, do you know?
Okay.
I'm Natalie Gallagher. I'm in psychology at Northwestern, and I'm interested in mental representations of social categories and social networks, and particularly how those are subject to change or resist change.
Hi, my name is Ola. I'm in sociology at Northwestern University, and I study financial transfers within families in different countries.
Hi, I'm Khwaja. I'm a PhD student at communication at Penn, and I study news consumption, how online audiences mostly consume news, both at a macro level as well as at individual level.
Hi, my name is Crystal. I'm from Purdue University, from hospitality and tourism management. I study organizational behavior and human resource management, specifically focus on in hotel industry.
Hey, I'm Tina. I'm a grad student at Northwestern. I study the effects of the 1960s Black rebellions on contemporary racial inequality, so contemporary policing. I'm also affiliated with the Northwestern Neighborhood Networks Initiative, so I do support gun violence.
Wow, I want to keep up with all of your work. There's a lot of overlap, which is really, really wonderful. If there's like a list that later maybe I can get of people's contact info, or if people have websites where they like link to things they've published, I'm genuinely so interested in a lot of the stuff you mentioned. Cool. So the way we're going to start, I will briefly give you a synopsis of, I think part of the reason we were invited here, a big like asset that we provide to the academic community is data that we receive from the city and curate. We focus in Chicago on police disciplinary records, which were declared public information in 2014, a ruling Calvin versus Chicago. And once we started getting data from the city, we decided to incorporate as a nonprofit and just serve this function to the public. We make all of our underlying data available on GitHub for people to use, cited in a lot of academic papers. And so that's how a a lot of the community, a lot of the academic community reaches out to us. I don't know if this is going to load. My internet's going to okay, we'll just keep going. So I won't necessarily spend time going through the database with you all because I do think that you guys can easily click through that on your own. Also, you can go on our GitHub account anytime and download and use that for any of your policing research. I would, however, like to talk to you about the disconnect that we've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed, between people who are working on this research and those who are most affected on the ground, per se. And I think that's part of what makes our work maybe the most helpful for you guys, is an understanding of if something is, if a project you're working on, an algorithm that you're working on, an analysis you're working on, is it, in the most simplistic terms, is it driving more people to be put into jail? We discuss a lot as we go through a strategic planning process at the Invisible Institute. We've only been around for about 4 years now. We discuss a lot is our primary goal to curate and make accessible public information, or is our goal to have fewer people be put in jail? And as a journalism organization, that is our purpose, is to make information accessible, because without it, you can't do any of the work that you all are doing. On a personal level, the reason that I'm involved with the Invisible Institute is I want to reduce mass incarceration. I am personally an abolitionist, though I wouldn't call everyone in my organization that. So we're going to start off today by just watching a series of interviews with some of our high school students. This footage comes from the Youth Police Project, which is an ongoing project that we've been a part of for the past 8 years now. Every Tuesday, we go into a classroom, a broadcast media classroom, and we basically film with high school students. Every Tuesday, their junior and senior year. So we get to know a group of students as they grow up and transition into young adulthood. And then we continue to know them as they are our alumni, our young adults. You guys might be familiar with a recent report that said 45% of Black men between the ages of 20 and 24 are not in school and not in jobs. And I would say that part of our work and our relationships touches that population, and we learn from them every single day. Learning about where our data is flawed, when we think that we're getting accurate information on pedestrian stops, we're not. When we think we're getting accurate information on traffic stops, we're not. When we think we're getting accurate information on use of force reports, we're not. We learn time and time again through our relationships that we only see TRRs, tactical response reports, which is a form that police officers fill out when they use force on somebody. We only see those when they've also made an arrest. We know anecdotally that our students are touched by officers all the time. Force is used on them all the time, and we can't find the corresponding tactical response report. So this is a way that our data analysis stays accountable and constantly checked by the people that we are working for. More importantly, they work with us. So as they grow up out of high school, they become interns and get involved in interviewing, transcribing, driving inquiries, filming, whatever it is. It's my computer? Oh no, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Jason, I did share the doc with you. If you want to connect yours. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thank you. I texted it to you, but also you should be able to grab that. I didn't share it with you on Dropbox. I just texted it. I can't because my computer's dead. So are you guys just here for one day, or is it a longer? Oh, 2 weekends. Okay. And are all the guest speakers who are coming in, are they coming in at a similar perspective, or who else is coming to talk to you guys?
It was
Communications professors.
Okay.
I have my full scientist. We have mainly first from academia, and Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, now you're showing there
Cool.
as an extended thing.
I'm glad to. So is that me or her?
No, that's yours.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. But thank you. So we'll watch these videos. I'll talk to you briefly about ongoing investigations we're doing into social media monitoring practices, and people that have mentioned that here, I would love to learn more and talk to you about what angle you're coming at it from. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about and I would love to hear your emerging ethical concerns with computational social science, specifically around surveillance, predictive policing, a little bit on network mapping. But to start, I think it's really important that we share the same foundation of having watched these interviews.
That's enough.
You just make it, except it's still cut off.
Do this.
It's a little still cut off. Can I just do something?
Saucy. Asante, Vernon, Devontae Stewart, James Adams, Erica Johnson, Jamari Triggs, Malik Gardner, Deanna Rice, Richard Porter, Christopher Wood. Yeah, that's an everyday thing. I mean, I just be walking with my friends or something. But, I could be walking by myself and then, they'll pull up, get on the car, or get on the wall, spread your legs, put your hands up, put your hands on the gate, don't move, search in my pockets. Pretty much every time I go outside.
I was with my father. I was walking down the street from my block. I was with my father. The police pulled up on the side of me and my dad and got up the car and put me and my father on the gate. Started searching us and everything. And then my dad said, "Why'd you pulling me and my son up? I'm just walking with my son to the store." And they said, "Y'all fit the description. Y'all look like y'all was on something or something. Like y'all had something in y'all pocket or something." So they searched us and whatever.
They just look at you funny, we know you're doing something, but we gonna wait till you do it.
They stopped us and they asked me, what I'm going. And that's when they went in my pockets, threw my keys, and took my money. And I had to go up to the 71st Street police station to get it back. And they said, I asked for the officer, that harassed me. They said they couldn't find him.
And sometimes I see this all the time, they ride up slow, they get out patiently, just get on the car. Like this, they used to doing it. Get on the car for what?
Like the way they come up on you, it's Safari or something. When they see prey, they attack.
Hey, they pulled up. It was like 6 cars that pulled up. They hopped out fast and get on the wall, handcuffed us, took our information down, and they like, you all now being dispersed. Y'all, we better not see y'all over here for the rest of the night. Catch y'all going to jail, no questions asked. Like, I've been in a couple of situations where the police come around and the boy put his hand over my shoulder. I'm like, come on, let's walk. And then I'll walk with him. And then as soon as the police leave, they'll come, we gotta go. But they use me, they use females, period, for a reason for them not to get messed with. And he didn't have to even have nothing on him. He just didn't want to feel like he'd stop going through that.
We just walking throwing snowballs. And they stopped us like, "Hey, what you doing?" And I was like, "We're throwing snowballs." And then they got, "Are you trying to get smart?" And they started to yell this, and that. And I hit the first thought in my mind was just run. But I was like, "No, I'm gonna stay here." And they got out the car. They patted us down. They put one of the dudes in handcuffs for no reason. Put him in the back seat. I guess that was just to scare him or whatever, because he was talking smart. And
all that other being disrespectful. But then like they let us all go.
You can't even hang out no more. That's how. Like if they see you as a group, they stop you.
Every time I get off the bus, I have to walk down 74th, and it's some like depending on what time I make it, it'll be a police car up to passing. And like as soon as I hit the alley, they'll slowly go. So I try to put my head down and play my phone, so they can keep going.
It's like restricted. You can't do stuff that regular people would because it's like you being harassed.
Like if I'm in a car, we just try to just go on about our way, just drive past and just hope they don't mess with us that day.
Yeah, like, if I'm outside with my friends, like if I see police, like sometimes I, go across the street, walk by myself, just so, they don't bother me. They could target the crowd, but not me.
If you got dreads, then you're an easy target. Because there's a lot of people, a lot of kids with dreads in my neighborhood. I try not to have any run-ins with the police because I don't know how they're gonna hop out the car or how many people are actually in the car or how their day has been going. Because like if they're having a bad day, they can easily just take it out on you because they're the police.
I mean, we just gotta pick our places where we gotta go. Like we know where the police at. We know how the police is in certain neighborhoods. So why would we go somewhere where the police is more strict than to get in trouble over there? Because somebody might talk back or, get into an argument with them and we all just end up in jail. Like we just gotta pick where we gonna hang out at.
Make you want to change your routes. It makes you scared to walk past the police. You don't know what they're gonna say. It made me feel small because like I would have stopped for no reason. I was just minding my business.
I mean, every situation is upsetting with the police.
I feel like we're enemies because we have no relationship and you are just harassing me now.
The police nowadays, they making it harder to serve and protect because now all the kids are thinking that the police are bad. Like if you see a police officer, they shouldn't go to a police officer. It shouldn't be like that.
It makes me feel angry. Like, why'd you stopping us? All this killing us going on. Why'd you stopping us? We innocent. We actually going to a destination.
Steady harassing people, like that's not gonna make them want to work with you.
Like, they're over you and you're under them. Therefore, you don't matter. Their word will prevail over yours. I'm almost a man, but it made me feel less than a man. From stopping me. Somebody going into my pockets. It just make you feel down. Like you ain't nobody. They make you feel like that. They think they're the police and they got all the power.
So I would love. Thank you. Thank you guys for watching. So those are some of our older students. We take a lot of our alumni. Actually, this Saturday, we're taking a bunch of our alumni on a long, long road trip to Washington, D.C., where we'll visit the African American Smithsonian, we'll visit Hirshhorn, we'll visit a bunch of other places. For many of the students, it's their first time out of Chicago. For some, they've been around the Midwest to the South to visit family. But it is extremely important for us, no matter what, that we like whoever our relationships are that are informing our work, even something as straightforward as this video. And I think this applies to academic work. A really important principle we have is that we're not only extracting information as like an interview, and then after the paper, video, or whatever is published, then we never talk to that person again. And so I know that that's a constant debate with research and journalistic ethics. But for us, a very important thing is like, if we are able to sort of capitalize off of a story, we're able to like get a new citation off of one of their stories, we continue to give them opportunities. We keep them in the mix as research assistants, et cetera. And so that might just be something to think about as you go through your careers. Whose stories are you benefiting from, and how do their lives change or not after your work on them is published? So yeah, that's a video from a few years ago. That's basically kind of what I was talking about. Recently, I saw a very helpful, concise way of thinking. If you work in tech or journalism, something that is very important, I think it applies also to academia, asking yourself at every step of the way, who does this help and who does this hurt? Because it is true that with almost anything you're doing, there will be an answer to both things. We don't really need to explain all of this. I think now hearing your research topics, I wasn't sure how like similar to our work your work is, but I think you guys understand that computational social science is not always a great thing, or great in terms of social justice outcomes, but has been used and will continue to be used to perpetuate mass incarcerations, killing rates, deportations. A lot of things that we're going to talk about today are surveillance and data sharing with a lack of transparency, and how that's sort of at the center of my work and I'm sure a lot of yours. So social media monitoring briefly, sounds like, raise your hand again if you said that you touch on that, I think a lot at this table, right? Have you guys, before we jump into like this specific topic, I'd be so curious to know, have you guys ever had any encounter with the police? And that could be something as simple as a traffic stop, being stopped on the street and asked a question. Yeah, everybody? Have you ever received a friend request before by somebody that you felt was not a real person? Yeah. Have you ever had an intervention where somebody tried to talk to you because of something they saw because somebody saw what you put online? So the school we work in, Hyde Park Academy, it's on 62nd and Stony Island, so right below Hyde Park, the neighborhood. It's like at the north end of Woodlawn. They have officers in schools, school resource officers. They also have a separate program, the Gang School Safety Team, which is a part of the Chicago Police Department, that dispatches police to schools to make arrests if a fight breaks out or if an early intervention needs to take place. We're just starting to understand what early interventions really look like on the CPS and CPS is Chicago Public Schools. But what we do know is from 2014 through 2017, the University of Chicago's crime lab hired 2 crime intelligence analysts with funding from the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. So that funding allowed them to purchase Dunami software, which is like CIA level standards developed by Pathar, I believe. And it allowed them to, without making those types of friend requests, so that's also a tactic that schools use as friend requests, or officers also use that. This software allows administrators and these analysts to search for keywords within Hyde Park Academy, school mascot, Stony Island, and try to detect if an altercation is going to bring out or if there's any sort of gang affiliation. The gang affiliation thing is important because within Chicago Public Schools and the Chicago Police Department, they say that there is no connection between the gang database. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the gang database. There's no connection between the gang database and this sort of information collection. But people who work regularly in schools and also work with police the way that we do find that kind of hard to believe. It seems like if Chicago Police Department is contracting the University of Chicago Crime Lab to make interventions on the basis of gang affiliation, it's hard to tell, and most likely it informs this like larger collection of the gang database, because the gang database is really describing a broader system of the CLEAR system, which is an acronym. I don't know what it stands for. But within that contains multiple lists, so it's hard for us. That is like an ongoing question that we have in our work: is there a way we can prove that this kind of early intervention system is being used towards the gang database? So a couple of things. I would love to know, how do you get your data sets? Is it through Freedom of Information Act requests? Is it already publicly available? data sets? Yeah, people who work with social media or policing, what kinds of data sets are you using? Provided by Chicago Police Department.
Yeah, for social media, like the spray bit that's what I've done so far. There are aggregators that people have aggregated databases. I've spent a year compiling my own data set for my boss.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Other people?
I've also done some scraping on the FBI website with plans to do some FOIA requests to fill in some.
So your work is hypothetically replicable. Cool. That's a really important thing for us in our work, and a critique that I always like to share is a barrier to understanding predictive policing and criminalization practices is so much of the data that is the basis for an intervention or arrest is not publicly available. And there is like some of the obvious answers of, oh, it's dealing with juveniles, or, oh, we're trying to protect identities. I think those are things that are normally predictable. And on a more broad structural level, my concerns are like exist around private university partnerships with city governments where the private university, such as the Crime Lab, becomes essentially like a huge contractor that the CPD is dependent on. They hold the data, they do not make their data public so that it can be a replicable study. And a lot of what we're seeing around predictive policing and cops in schools are based on summary reports from the Crime Lab that we can't actually do like a substantial audit on. So that's something just generally I would push against in people's work. On a more national level, I'm pretty concerned about fusion centers. Are you guys familiar with fusion centers? Okay, so fusion centers, this is in the words of Andy Clarno, who is a great researcher at USC. He's a sociologist. But basically, fusion centers that exist around the country, and Chicago has poured a lot of money into them. I think they're called strategic decision support centers, if anyone wants to look them up, where local, state, and federal agencies will collaborate, and it will include ICE data, CPD data, DHS data, DOJ data. You get the picture. So it allows analysts from CPD to be working with analysts from other agencies and using data from different levels as the basis for deploying officers specifically. That's how the Crime Lab articulates their purposes. We can make more informed decisions about where we should be deploying officers. I would call it one of the most recent iterations of predictive policing, which is a very broad category. And I would be curious to know when Professor Papachristos comes in on Friday. I know that he sometimes criticizes predictive policing as such a broad term when you could be discussing so much within it. I think that criticism is valid, but I also think predictive policing is still an important term to use because predictive policing is not a new thing that's completely describing technology. Predictive policing also describes the phenomenon of seeing a black guy with dreads and thinking that he might have something on him and making a stop that way. So predictive policing lies on a historical spectrum, and a lot of the newer technologies we see and a lot of the new sociological methods we see are just a modern iteration of older practices. I will share these notes. We don't have to read through all of them, but I'll share this link so you guys can read through. These are just different examples of predictive policing. So just understanding that predictive policing can be describing something as straightforward as geographic predictors like hotspots. I think the big takeaway from both geographic individual predictors and other types of biased arrests are that they are, I don't want to state this like factually, but my concern is that it's hard to challenge this with the Constitution because reasonable suspicion, please don't get it correctly if I say something incorrectly, reasonable suspicion requires that you have more than one factor to intervene, and so, or to have suspicion. And so having a geographic predictor, it can become easier to have a geographic predictor. It can become easier to have an individual predictor based on a tweet that they made a tweet somebody made or a friend somebody has online, and that friend has committed some crime. And so the concern is that as we increasingly rely on social media surveillance, it will become easier and easier to have reasonable suspicion. And the Fourth Amendment would potentially be our only protection against that. The Fourth Amendment protects against search and seizure. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen, if you really want to jump into it, you could look up Terry versus Chicago. We've seen that actually the Fourth Amendment is not really protecting us as we further advance. These are the Chicago examples of data sharing that I was mentioning. Clear Sharing Project is like the system that CPD uses. So when people refer to the gang database, they're referring in large part to this combination of the Clear database and CPIC, which is, I believe it's relatively new. Recently, have you guys heard of the strategic subject list? Sure. No. The strategic subject list is a list of 400,000 people. I believe over 80% of them are African American who have been arrested or to have been, like, a requirement to be on the list is to have been arrested or be in relationship with somebody who has been arrested. And as you can imagine, knowing the segregation and knowing how networks work, it's very easy to get on the list. When we explain this concept to our students, the strategic subject list, if anyone wants to look it up, I think that's one of the more upsetting things we talk about is, like, students being like, damn, I'm on this list and I don't even know. And that's a common refrain. With Connect and Redirect Respect that I showed you guys earlier, that's not a thing that our students are informed of at any point that they remember, at least. Maybe it's mentioned somewhere, but they don't have a copy of their handbooks. It's both with Connect and Redirect Respect, with things like the strategic subject list and the gang database, and even with emerging projects like the race among researchers to best predict shootings using Twitter activities, having scraped Twitter, or having a contract with Twitter to use both Twitter activity and Facebook activity to predict, like, is this person going to be involved or around a shooting? With all of these things, I would consider our kids, our students, in some ways, research subjects who are not aware that they're research subjects. And so when we talk about, like, ethical practices of data research, we do have standards of, like, the IRB, but clearly there are ethical issues that the law will take a long time to catch up, and that our current platform of using Twitter, using Facebook, like, it's at a different level that we're not even in agreement about. Some students feel that it's like speaking in a public square. Some people feel like I have my privacy settings such that I have some accounts for this thing and some accounts for this thing. And in the end, as though they're, like, annoyed, honestly, or irritated about the fact that they are subjects of these various research projects, in the end, they're sort of just like, okay, this is my lived reality. I'm like, I know that cops are watching. I have to be careful about some of the things I say, or I'll tell my friends to take down stuff. But I think what really, really sucks about it is not that you're being watched necessarily, or this feeling of privacy, but this truth that it can all be used against you in court, and there's not really anything you can do about it. A lot of our kids already live their lives knowing that it is very likely that they'll be incarcerated or shot or arrested. And to know that this just further cements that reality instead of protecting them is probably one of the more upsetting things. Are you guys familiar with the researcher Forrest Stewart? So Forrest Stewart is on our board, and he's a wonderful person. I talk to him a lot, but we have a really sharp disagreement about some of his work. And I doubt he's watching, but if you ever do, hey, Forrest. Which is, I fear a lot of the work around analyzing music videos that some of our students participate in, where they participate in, like, drill rap videos. There's always people standing in the back dancing, like, whatever. Those videos are surveilled, and guns are detected in them, and then you try to draw a map of people who have been around that gun that was found, or have been around a person who's being put on trial. And when you talk to students about this, they're like, well, I just know that I won't serve as a witness. Like, I'm not gonna I'm not going to rat out a friend, because that, not just like morally, but also knowing that that could have consequences, physically, violently, towards themselves or family. Well, it's sort of like a catch-22 where they will either be held in contempt in court, or they will be retaliated against. So that's one of my students, Devin, who I talked to, who edits videos. He was sort of talking about how unfair that is, because he feels like he takes a lot of careful concern to the videos that he edits. He makes sure he's not filming people who are holding guns. If there's alcohol or guns, he tries very hard to blur it out. He actually wants it. He really respects his craft as an art form. And it's been one of the best ways for him to like build up his career as a multimedia producer, and also just as like a person living in the South Side. And to know that prosecutors can use YouTube videos against him is very disturbing, honestly. And he also feels like he can't really do anything about it. Like that's his livelihood. This is again something you can read over when we send it out, but it's basically pointing back at something we said earlier about how predictive policing is not a new thing that's only referring to new technologies, but it's just a continuation on this historical spectrum. So so when a stop and frisk happens, stop and frisk is a form of predictive policing. Traffic stops are a form. Okay. The last thing that I would like to talk to you about, if we have time, we can get into network mapping, but I feel like this is really important, policing grief. It's not a published coin term yet, but I've been saying it a lot. And it refers to this debate of sorts that I've been having with Forrest about what are the implications of this work as a researcher, and you develop an algorithm or you develop a surveillance technique, and you feel like it is to the benefit of furthering our understanding of how crime happens. What responsibility do you have for that after that technology is out in the world? And a lot of researchers, I would ask this question of Pablo Christos, I asked this question of Forrest Stewart, is that researchers often feel like the barrier between academia and the lived experiences on the ground are such that you just can't think about that after your technology is out in the world. But I would really, really push everyone to think hard about it. In this specific example, a lot of researchers who are using Twitter to try to best predict shootings. Originally, when a lot of these studies started, people were trying to target anger. Keywords would be around anger. So it would be like angry emojis, it would be curse words, it would be like smoke, which often means like you're gonna shoot somebody. And then researchers learned after ethnography or whatever, they learned that that actually there's a lot of posturing online, and I'm sure you guys know that. People have personas, people say stuff, people pose with other people's guns, even though that can be used against them. People pose with other people's cars. And it is not necessarily like their lived daily experience. What researchers have figured out is that when somebody dies and somebody says R.I.P. Miki, R.I.P. whoever, you can know more confidently that that person cared about Miki or whoever died. And so then you can guess that they would either be affected by that shooting, like either sadly, or they might be related to, attached to, not involved in, but in some way understanding a retaliation shooting. And that is really terrifying in my opinion, because if we scroll back up to this quote from one of my students, oh no, did I delete it accidentally? That's so sad if I did. Oh, I did not. Okay, great. Anyway, the quote basically says that a lot of our students live their lives out online after they graduate high school. When our students graduate, they often are not in college. They're often in and out of warehouse jobs. And they only leave the house if they have a very specific destination to go to. You heard one of the students say it in the video, we're on our way to a destination. And I have to ask and pull back, like, is that even a fair thing, that kid was doing the right thing? Are they not allowed to enjoy being outside? Are they not allowed to go to parks? Do they have to be going somewhere specifically as if they're on an ankle monitor, electronic monitoring bracelet, right? And for this reason, both the threat of not just policing, but of also gun violence A lot of our students, when they're between the ages of 18 and 24, are just indoors all the time, and that has all types of health consequences, right? But it also means that they luckily now have all of our students have smartphones, not most. And they're able to continue using Facebook in a way that maybe I didn't after graduating from university, because I was able to still be outdoors making friends. But a lot of our students live their lives out even on Facebook Live, Instagram Live, Snapchat. And it's not just huge situations of observing a shooting, but it might just be something like my baby's gender reveal, or somebody's birthday party, or just hanging out at home, putting on makeup. And so people really, really, truly connect with their peers, not just people they've long been out of touch with, through Facebook. And so if they're actually just living an extension of their private lives out online, and then expressing grief because they cannot even go outside to express their grief, they can't go on a run, they can't go necessarily to a funeral for safety concerns, and then to be policed for expressing that grief online, I think my biggest takeaway is just to sit with that realization that yes, students, young people do posture online and perform all kinds of anger online, but I think it is seriously worrisome if we're also policing their grief. Yeah, I would like to not end on that super sad note, though I know we're running out of time. I want to end instead on the note that when with some of the implementation of technologies, I know you guys aren't working for Taser or Axon or whatever, right? Neither are we. But it is, I am very sympathetic and understanding of the pressure within sociology and other departments to do work that is very capitalizable. And a lot of that means that we're increasingly depending on network mapping that companies like ShotSpotter, Taser, Axon, whatever, can use to sell more of their technology. And rather than thinking of that just like broadly capitalism being some sort of evil, I want us to come back to the idea of authentic relationships and thinking about ways in your work, no matter what it is, you're not just put into a box. You can also have authentic relationships outside of your work. So if you're studying polarization online or how local news gets done, meeting and working with people on the ground and using that perspective to inform some of your thinking and your inquiry, whether or not you're actually including them as a formal research subject, it's okay. Not everyone needs to be a formal research subject. They can sort of just inform some of your perspective and your personal questioning. And Nicole Wynn, who I will end with from UIC, really, who has been studying social media monitoring, said this in a really helpful way to me, which is like, she's like, you keep trying to, you're trying to like parse out what Connect and Redirect to Respect is doing and what's wrong with this software and what's wrong with the crime lab's data analysis. And instead, she's like, I think what your real irritation is with this project with Connect and Redirect to Respect is that it's generally, if you know teachers, you know that authentic relationships between teachers and students are one where the teacher can identify if something is going on with the kid, if they've been getting into fights recently, if they got a black eye, if they're on edge. And that is something that the teachers in the past have been able to sort of step in and do something about. And she's like, and it sounds like your concern is actually that this software, these analysts, this program are in some ways attempting to replace the authentic relationship between a teacher and a student. In the context of a lot of our students' classrooms increasingly just becoming computer labs, they're taking most of their courses online. Yeah, so I think no matter what you do in your work, I really, really encourage you to keep authentic relationships at the core of it and hold your work accountable to them. Thank you guys. I will share this with you. Do you guys have any questions or insights or thoughts you want to share? I know I said I wanted it to be a discussion. I went by so fast. Sorry.
This is super random, but I saw online that you guys have collaborated with HR Dad.
We have, yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah, they're great. What have we done with them? So one of the things, so Asha has actually worked a lot with HR DAG, a few different projects. The one most recently that I've been a part of is trying to, we have that database of like hundreds of thousands of complaints, and not all documents are attached to each of those complaints. And right now the process is that anytime we want to read the documents behind a complaint, we have to make a frame of information at request. And that process is very slow because, as you can imagine, there's only one or two people at the police department that can actually go find that document and send it to us. So we maybe every week we only send, every week we can only request like 5 documents. So HR DAG was trying to help us detect which of the requests or which of the complaints we should be making requests for, because what we were trying to find were instances of gender violence that were not categorized as such. So every complaint is categorized as something, whether it be like a legal search, operational violation, whatever. And then there's a secondary complaint that might include sexual misconduct or sexual harassment. But there's a lot of words when you read through the complaint narrative, you might notice things like vagina or grabbed or whatever, that as Asha would read through all of these complaints, the tag is like, this actually sounds like it could be sexual misconduct. And then based on reading like over 100 of them, we gave that data to HR DAG and we said, can you help us figure out some other things within our database that we should make requests? So it's like a machine learning.
I was going to show, so this is our database, data.cpdp.co, and what you're looking at is like a heat map, and then here's a bunch of ways to like sort the different complaints. So what Maira is describing is that the data comes to us with labels on it, like categories and category codes, and you can hunt those down. And so if you're looking explicitly for sexual misconduct committed by police officers, and you can also look for things like sexual harassment in the workplace, but we're primarily concerned with basically assault by police officers. That's included in the conduct unbecoming category. And under here, you can see sexual misconduct. So if you had the big data set, which we have and is on the GitHub, everyone can access, it would look like there's 32 sexual misconduct complaints. And that's over all of the data we have. So like going back into the early 2000s. However, we keep finding that there is conduct unbecoming other categories that actually include sexual assault. So this one says conduct unbecoming association with a felon. So that wouldn't show up in your sexual misconduct stats if you were to run it. But once you get the underlying complaint record and you start to look at what it says, like actually in the narrative, then you can start to read that it's alleged that in 2003, at Addison, Chicago, the accused police officers put an unknown drug in the complainant's drink and sexually assaulted her. So what you see is like the underlying document doesn't match the data. And it means that hundreds and hundreds of these are disappearing within the official data set. And this was labeled this because the woman who made the complaint was a felon. So instead of sexual assault, it becomes, hanging out with a felon. And this is super common. This is just one I pulled up because we like recently grabbed it, but it's super common for these things to be filed under illegal search or illegal arrest because they'll like, go ahead, Asha.
There's one after that one, but I just
I'm sorry. It's hard because I can't see the screen. Go ahead, Asha.
yeah, like this CRAD that ends in 7-8 was about an officer that illegally searched someone by like his hand on their vagina, but it was found under improper search of person instead of sexual misconduct, so it's probably related to
So trying to.
Yeah, so this one is just labeled, like Asha said, improper search of a person. And so that stuff about sexual assault is super disappearing. So with HR DAG, it's a matter of not just like what types of complaints. We're looking specifically right now Black women who make complaints against men that are categorized as illegal search, but also following officers. Like which officers are these complaints disappearing from and which officers keep committing these crimes and things like that. So there's a whole lot of factors that go into that. Yeah.
I was wondering if you have similar cases but targeting young men. And I'm asking because in Paris, there's been a case recently that complainants won because what happened is like basically they wanted young men to like not be in the streets, and they sexually like stalked them, first them in a sexual way. Way.
Yeah. Yeah. We have seen instances of that.
It definitely with argument. For sure.
Yeah.
Just like the sense that they're touching you
Yeah.
inappropriately when they're searching you. Yeah, it's hard because if a juvenile is listed as the complainant in the data, then we don't get that data because of privacy records. If a juvenile is the victim, God, I hate that word, but juvenile is a victim and their parent or guardian is complaining on behalf of them, then we do get that data. But it's really hard to see that stuff. It's also none of the guys who we work with who have had these feelings of like inappropriately being touched, none of them are making complaints.
Yeah.
They're like hardly even talking out loud, and maybe to us after we know them for 2 years and we've like shown ourselves to be trustworthy and whatever. But those how you get at those through data. I don't know, Asha, if you have something to add to that.
I found a lot of people search with men, especially like people like putting like police officers searching people's anal cavities, even though there's like no reason to, and some people do complain about this.
Maybe.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry if you already said this, but when you're talking with students and you're hearing them talk about these terrible instant interactions we've had with police, is it purely just like from journalistic and reporting, or do you encourage them to go move forward with like a formal process?
Yeah, so we always offer. I don't know how many times I've mentioned like I can go through. A lot of times a student will call us when some encounter has just happened. So like recently somebody's been like in a car accident and they felt like they were mishandled. And they'll call us because they want to sort of get guidance on how to best handle that situation. But when we follow up with them, do you want to also go through the complaint process? We can make complaint. Almost always they say no, and in part because the sustain rate is so low, like 2.5%. So it's just sort of like keep going through this process. So yeah, but
This one is
I think the vast majority of our
labeled
conversations
as
are
false
not
arrest.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, and we're lucky that we have some text scraping from these from a lot of different sources.
So I guess I'm just kind of curious about like the scope of these kinds of misclassifications, like to the degree to which you know from some sense about like the proportion of this population reports, and then kind of following up on this because it's kind of going with okay, you know, from just a purely classification kind of issue, like what kind of information do you throw at it to kind of isolate these things, and then just going. Well, in this category, we're more likely to see these kind of specifications before, like, you know. So one way that's, you know, like throwing things, you know, like one way is to try to locate them. So it's kind of two-part questions. Like, one's like scale.
So scale, I don't think we have any idea yet. We started this because some police officers wrote to us after we published the data and was like, whoa, that's not what we did. You have it categorized as like domestic violence, but that wasn't it. So that's when we started to get a sense of the categories being wrong. And police department and the oversight agencies have changed the categories so many times. Like I can't get accurate dates. Like I know, you know, August of 2014, this was the category set, and August of 2016, this was the category set, but where they changed, we have no idea. Like the police department can't provide it either. In terms of how we get at it, that's something they're doing with the HR DAC, but maybe Asha can talk a little bit more about some of the factors that like make you suspicious of it.
I also want to say that it is really easy to find these miscategorizations. Like you can send out 5 FOIA requests at a time quickly, and usually at least 1 out of every 10 is actually miscategorized. So it seems to be a really, really big issue.
Just like what makes them suspicious? Like what are the identifying things?
Yeah, I think it's always like really obvious because they'll be like the complainant will say like this officer like grabbed my dress, and like when it's but sometimes there are definitely times where it's less obvious, where you see that like just the police officer randomly searched someone's body and like the investigator won't say, like the person will complain that they searched their body, but the investigator like won't like put anything else or like really look into that at all, and they'll just put in the summary digest like they searched their vehicle and their like person. So it's like those are more confusing where they still had no reason to be touching that person's body, or you see that they're like searching someone's body in public, but like the way that the investigator's language is so like diminishing of like what that actually means that it's also can be confusing. But I think when we see like someone's bodies being searched in public, or like we have different words of like what they touched or something like that, it's more we flag those as ones that are definitely sexual misconduct.
And was that your emotion just
Yeah. I mean, the main problem is that when they intake a complaint, the person who's intaking the complaint just like picks what category it is. There's like very little narrative guidance on how to pick one. The other thing is that their data system for a long time only allowed one category to be selected. So say a cop like racially profiled you, pulled you over, sexually assaulted you, and then hit you with their baton. They just classify it as like what they think is the worst one, and that would maybe be excessive force. And you can see it all over because a super sort of benign example is that there's a bunch of officers accidentally discharging their tasers, and sometimes they label it as excessive force, even though no one gets it, and sometimes they call it like misuse of department equipment, and like they just, but you can search accidentally discharging their tasers narratively and see all the different categories someone's slapping on it. Just like no sense on the back end of it, and even now they have a data system that lets them select multiple categories for different allegations. They're just not using it.
Do you know who does the categorization? Like, is it written on the form anywhere the person who's doing it?
No. That's, I mean, you could, theoretically, you could go into the police department data system and look at everybody who touched it, like starting with the intake, and then see who the first person was. But often they don't even put a category. They wait until it goes to the investigator, and the investigator assigns a category, and then they investigate, and then usually they change the category to whatever they think is more appropriate eventually. But it's why you'll see things like excessive force complaints, and then it's just, they're like, yeah, this happened, they sustain it, but they only get 1 day suspension, and you would think that's really weird, which is what we thought at first. But it turns out they're not sustaining them on the excessive force. They're saying, like, you forgot to file the correct paperwork. But we can't see that in the data. So it makes a lot of it just extremely unreliable. Yeah.
I don't want to give myself the last question.
Hi. You talked a lot about like the kinds of research that are related to using calculated degree of harm. One of the things that has come up in the conversation on here and elsewhere is how algorithms can move around that. So I'm wondering, like, thinking about like work that doesn't necessarily touch policing directly, but those algorithms can move beyond any researchers have. Do you have any guidance or experience with that case?
Is there a specific one you're thinking of?
I mean, Papa Christo's stuff is a really good example of this. He was doing network analysis. He was doing it on homicides. He was thinking that the majority of homicides, victims and perpetrators are committed by a very small percentage of the population. And then his recommendation was for social intervention. So you find the people who are likely to kill or be killed. You hit them with a bunch of social safety net resources. You hang out in their life. You hook them up with a nonprofit, things like that. The police department just took it and made the strategic subject list. And now what they mostly brag about is like this weekend we raided 87 houses, mostly off the strategic subject list. We made 250 arrests, and then like that's Papa Christos' work, like out in the world, just like sucked in. And I don't know, they just get sucked in everywhere. I'd love to hear successful examples of people who've like contained some of their work or put it out there. And I don't know if it has to do with like really forward-thinking context, like when you put something out there, already having a plan for where it goes, or putting it out there first with people you trust to do things with it. It's hard for me to, I don't know. I don't make algorithms. Other people have thought on that.
I was thinking about it in the context of like the news and social media broadly. A lot of the algorithm work is modeling topics, searching for text, extracting things from text, the kinds of things that
Yeah, it's hard when you put yourself out in the world in a transparent and replicable way, like anybody can take it. Right? This is like up and down.
I guess it's also one thing to sell the technology, which is a thing that researchers do. So be very thoughtful about who you're selling your work to.
So I actually have a broad question for some more specific things last week. This is actually a really thing I'm kind of curious about. We use them ourselves when, even on something as simple as when we're trying to mint students. And so, to the degree to which to solve algorithmic bias problems is to exclude certain features that like race and other composition kind of features, to what degree do you agree with that? In the sense that we can, the one problem I have in it is that sometimes these features, as we always know, can disappear and represent themselves in features that we think are representable, and we're not soaking up the fact that, okay, we're capturing race in this one, we're capturing geographic location. So to what degree do you guys that are in this engaged in this work agree with that? Because I know that that's been one of the bigger questions about feature exclusion because of these things, but not really considering how data works.
Yeah,
that lives.
I was recently in a room full of like attorneys and public records people and data people, and we were talking about mugshots and how mugshots are just like affirmatively released constantly by police departments. And there was this this debate happening about, should we release them? Okay, they're public records, they're a matter of public interest, everyone has to know who's arrested, but obviously they can have harmful effects, but public records, but harmful effects. And finally I was just like, can we just be honest? We know who's affected by mugger.
Base rate error rates for this classification and how much error it produces more when it comes to the race or white cops or something.
Do you mean how much error there is just in the demographic data about who's making or providing?
There could be some error in overall classification.
Yeah.
It could be more bias when it comes to white policemen.
Right. Yeah, I will say that our investigations are mostly targeted. So we saw this thing about Black women mostly being most of their stuff when they allege sexual assault is miscategorized. So then we started going after complaints where Black women were making complaints against white officers. So that's targeted. So our sense is probably super high. But also in the worst officers, you see more miscategorization for sure. There are repeat offenders in the Chicago Police Department, and their complaints look pretty unique. For example, Jason Van Dyke, the cop who was just convicted of murder, you can see him using the N-word in tons of his complaints, and never classified as racist or verbal abuse, often excessive force or operations personnel, but in the meanwhile, he's attacking people racially. You can't see that anywhere in the data. But I don't know, in my opinion, if you got a cop who uses the N-word all the time, flag that guy. Give him a break on that one, But you see it all the time. In terms of database lines, we have no idea yet. We're pretty. What I had pulled up was the spreadsheet of all the documents we were going after so far, and I don't know how many are in there, maybe 250 at this point. It's not huge, but it takes time to get each underlying document.
Do you all plan to expand your FOIA requests and access to police data into other areas beyond just complaints?
Yeah,
definitely.
actually, our database has expanded in the past 2 years to include a lot more than complaint data. So we do have information about officer salaries, as much information about that officer as we can get, basically. That is part of city records, so whatever the city gives us, we'll put up. So it includes officer awards, and that has allowed us to see that after an officer uses force and files a tactical response report, they often get awards.
So this is all data sets we've collected from the city, and everything's on GitHub. We have this huge problem of matching officer names and stuff like that. But you can see we do have a lot of demographic data about them. Badge numbers are hard because badge numbers in Chicago aren't unique. They recycle them.
Yeah, there's no unique ID.
I swear to God. And sometimes Patrick Smith Sr. gives his son Patrick Smith Jr. not only his name but his badge number in these nice ceremonies. It's very hard. So not only do we use badge numbers, but we use like their date of appointment. So when they started, we use that in matching. We use their unit over time. We pull their salary data from the city. And then this guy's like a bad dude, Edward May, appears to still be just a patrol officer in District 8. He's at 136 allegations, which is like wild. That's tons. He has more than 88% of other officers' use of force reports. He has more than 87% of other officers' honorable mentions. And then you can see their timeline here. So something this is pretty useful for is seeing like when their unit changed. So when he moved from Unit 11 into Unit 8, because then you're talking not just about a geographical change, but potentially the population he's policing and where he gets placed and things like that. This guy's not super interesting. He just has these 2 units. But we see cops go from public housing south into West Side Tactical and then back into a Chicago public school. Like we personally were working at Hyde Park Academy with an officer who had shot and killed a teenager. And like, we didn't know, the administration didn't know. Like he was working at Hyde Park Academy. He shot and killed a teenager from diet and just like went back to work in 2 weeks. And like nobody told anybody. So being able to track their use of force, being able to track where they're moving across the city. Another guy at that school, Chris Golston, who, to be fair to Chris Golston, Officer Golston, the kids adored him. The kids like loved him. He let them sit in the car when it was cold. He was like hanging out with them. He was from Public Housing South and was like racking up complaints from Black women against him during that time. And they moved him to a public school and the kids loved him. I don't know what story that tells, but you should look into that guy. You know what I mean? I don't want to jump to conclusions, but.
And can you track maybe a certain complaint report in direct correlation with whatever shift they're making?
Yeah, so those are called ANAs. They're attendance and assignment sheets. So when an officer shows up for like roll call that day, there's an attendance and assignment sheet, and they're basically, I might be able to pull it up. I made a FOIA request for this a few years ago, but they're like super crude. It would be very hard to extract data from. And whoever commander is on or sergeant is on, he's like detailing his officers to different places, and so it's just tracked on that paper. So if you were doing an investigation, a specific officer, you could track down where they were at the time the incident happened. Mostly the way you would get that is that on the complaint records, we have a pretty good location in terms of the beat number, because beats are basically blocks in Chicago. So if you're looking at a complaint or use of force incident, you might have the beat location. But if you're looking for something that was never reported, trying to figure out what officer was there, that's a nightmare. You do it one officer at a time, really. But investigative journalists do that stuff all the time. You just got to go and track down the right sheets. This, go ahead.
What kind of resources and process do you have to check the mental health of your collaborators, but also your participants?
That's a great question. So that's my FOIA request for attendance. Assignment sheets. And you can see kind of what they look like. That's what they look like. So they have told me repeatedly that they can't provide, this is like the name, whatever, and then that's their assignment description at that point. They've just told me they don't have this in a data set. They're like typing it into a spreadsheet and then printing it out on their computers. They like put them in these binders. That's like how our multi-million-dollar police department tracks there.
To answer your question, we don't really do anything formal, but we have a very, very like flexible work environment, which means that like when we are working on something like gender violence stuff, we're extremely lenient, I would say, with like the amount of breaks that people get. So like we'll be in the lake before or afterwards, and like we sort of develop very genuine relationships with the students that stay on and work with us. So it becomes less of a like research subject, researcher relationship, and more of a just like sharing equally kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know. How would you really have
a vacation policy called when you need it?
Yeah.
That helps a little bit. Yeah. But with the kids, it's a matter of matching resources mostly. So like what resources are out there you're not taking advantage of, who in your life can help you get them. We do a lot of actually like resource mapping with the kids about who's in their life and who's helpful and who's supportive and things like that. Go ahead, Emma.
I also think like these two they talk to you all the time. Yeah. So it's important for us. Like I think when I was talking about it, like relationship, that also helps. I think like kind of soften the blow of talking about the first things for them and for us too. I think it's really rewarding for us to talk about that.
When we talk more about and necessarily about police, it's an important balance.
I also want to just quick about the extra police data. So if you hit invisibleinstitute.com/FOIA, FOIA, it's like not a linked page, but we use it pretty well. There's a bunch of, not all of our FOIA stuff. So one, if you're looking for other data, just reach out because there's so much stuff we have. We've been making requests for years and years with like no idea what we do with it. So we have tons of stuff and we'd be happy to share everything we have as public. We don't hold anything back. But on this page, you can specifically see some of the data updates we've made, and these are all CPD. So this is like our backend stuff, and you can see like where these things are coming from, and you know the data set, and we can go to GitHub and grab them for it. But it also is just like we have so much data that is like
Ask your question.
Yeah. So essentially, you know, the many things you're doing, one thing is creating a certain source of information transparency. Yeah. And you noted it, right? Like, and so like, do people respond more? Do you notice like general, you know, general impacts about knowing like something about like Edward May?
Right.
What is infraction?
No, that's. I mean, I think it's actually been a really important lesson from our work that like information transparency is not enough. Like I think we've all learned like you give the public so much information and actually it like realizes them. But one of our goals of making this site is in some ways like a demonstration project about transparency that can sort of pressure and show the government and show other journalists and people that like actually you can make officer names public and the world is not going to come crashing down. The Office of the Inspector General, I think this is like a really great success for us, has now made their own version of a site where you can search by officer names and see misconduct history. It's not as like accessible in terms of like usability, but the fact that our Inspector General is doing that now is like a win because I think 5 years ago we never could have imagined that. So I think that's the kind of impact we're seeing. Not so much like, oh, Edward May, like let's flag him, like that, but it's been more at a structural.
This is our Airtable of like the FOIA requests that we've made, and these this is like the last Airtable we had to start over again because we like hit too much. But you'll see like we just have tons of stuff, and if you hit invisibleinstitute.com/FOIA, you can actually see this and look through it yourself. We also are just like constantly bringing more stuff in, and one thing we loved is that as we're developing our site, we were working really closely with specifically Bokar from Harris. I don't know if anyone knows Bokar Bob, but he would tell us like, okay, in order to do this analysis, I also need unit data. Okay, if I'm going to do that, then I also need their badges over time. If I'm going to do that, like, why haven't you given me personnel information? So we just are like, every time you need something, requesting it, and it goes into our general archive, and then Bokar can use it, and that data is available for everyone. So we're happy to field requests about what data sets you would like to get and where, because we also do them all over the country. So, you know, if you're going to compare 3 police departments, you need not just complaint data, but traffic stop data, arrest data, personnel files, like all that stuff. So.
To that, what would you not like us to do? You know what I'm saying?
Don't
like,
sell it.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, we catch you selling it, Rakona.
Don't use it to put more kids in jail. That would be my big thing. Yeah. Oh, you should.
Is there something that you would like us in particular to do for you? Because like I know you have like all these things you want, but is there like a number one goal you need a feature with this data? Like is there a tool you want, or would you like help with record leakage? Or we're doing a project out of this, so we might as well like help you.
Broad wish list.
Yeah.
Oh, you know,
top
actually,
5.
we could get back to you with the wish list.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Record linkage pool is really hard to do. And I just started doing a thing of calling like every officer ever, which is I'm just taking like all the rosters we've had from around the country, and we're basically just gonna like put them into a massive spreadsheet and I don't even care about record linkage at this point. I'm trying to look for the same names, but one of our goals is that law enforcement agencies have to like register their police officers, even if it's just at a state level, and they're not doing it consistently, and states aren't sharing data with them, so they're copying jurisdictions like crazy. Like they get in trouble over here, they quit. They're down in New Orleans, they quit. They're out in Phoenix, they quit, like that. So that's like one massive project we're working on right now, and there are like a couple other big ones that are going on. But I don't really manage like the data and technology stuff. Our colleague Rajiv Sinclair does, so we'd have to ask
his wish list.
You don't have to come up with that on the spot. Yeah. Well, awesome. Can we give a big thanks? Thank you, everyone. So we ran a bit over time. So what we'll do is we'll just